All right, hi guys. We're just going to do another follow-up video to Roy Spencer's article on me about ranting about flat earth theory when in fact he is defending flat earth theory. I'm just going to look at Roy Spencer's basically his rebuttal paragraph to me, and then also I'm going to include a comment that came from the comment section at What's Up With That somebody sent to me. So let's have a look at that and start with that for a moment. So this was Roy's statement again. So as an astrophysicist, that's me, he, Joe, should recognize that the division by 4 in the figures takes the solar constant at the distance of the Earth from the Sun and spreads it over the spherical shape of the Earth. All right, so we discussed that in the previous video. We're going to do it some more here. And then the comment from What's Up With That was the Sun illuminates a disk of area pi r squared. The total surface area of a sphere is 4 pi r squared, so the average insolation on the surface of the sphere is 1/4. That is high school mathematics, not rocket science or astrophysics. So you can see they've really got some comments about my skill as an astrophysicist, eh? All right, well, let's have a look here. So this is not a scale drawing, but it shows the basic idea. Here we have the Sun, and here's the Earth. And what happens with the Earth? What happens with the Earth is sunshine falls on one hemisphere at once, at any time ever. That's all that ever happens for the Earth. Now, this value here that Roy even referenced, 1370 watts per meter squared. Now, a watt is a joule per second, right? A joule per second. This value is an instantaneous value. Well, it's in fact the value for 1 second, right? This value of the flux, which those diagrams divide by 4, is the instantaneous or the per second input. So what happens in any given second for the Earth? In any given second, is this not what is happening? This is the top of atmosphere flux. This is the flux just outside the top of the atmosphere, hitting the Earth. And then it falls over the Earth and dilutes as a function of the cosine of the zenith angle pointing towards the Sun. That's how sunlight falls on the Earth, doesn't it? That is actually a bit better of astrophysics, isn't it? Compared to, well, look, can you guys see that? I can barely see it on my screen, but look at here. 1370, let's go back one there, 1370 watts per meter squared divided by 4. So now we take the planet Earth and we've spread 1370 over it, over the entire surface area of the Earth at once, averaged it over. Even though sunlight actually physically falls like this per any given second, what they do in the greenhouse effect derivation diagrams and in climate physics is spread this instantaneous value, which actually falls like this, and they simply spread it and dilute it. That's why I've used a fainter color of yellow here, on this Earth. They dilute it over the entire surface area of the Earth at once. So tell me, brilliant people out there, what is better astrophysics? Is it good astrophysics when we take the per second input and spread it over the entire surface area of the Earth at once? Or is this good astrophysics, where we have the per second input falling on the Earth as it actually does fall on the Earth? Now, of course, the effect of that, as I discussed in my last video, was that you're creating a surface here that has uniform input. Now, this is impossible. It's impossible to have a planet and to take its per second input and to pretend that the input from the Sun falling on one side of this planet gets spread over the entire surface area of the Earth at once. That's physically impossible. It is a physical, theoretical impossibility. It never exists. It's 100% impossible. You can do that in math. Sure, on paper, you can do that. You can take the per second input and spread it over the entire surface area of the Earth at once. Sure, you can do that. Why would you do that? Really, why would you do that? Why would you do that? That doesn't make sense. And if you're going to do that and run with it, what's going to happen? Well, as we have seen and been discussing, what happens is you generate all sorts of silly physics that likewise doesn't exist. This is real. Here's the per second input. This is what actually happens. This is physically impossible. You can do it in mathematics, sure. Sure, Roy, you're taking the per second input and you're spreading it over the entire sphere, but that is physically impossible, isn't it? I know you can do it in mathematics on paper, but it is actually an impossibility, a non-existent. It has nothing to do with reality. It is a non-existent, right? Now, the effect of that, of course, is if you were to have an object receiving light from the sun, and it was totally uniform over its entire surface area, what would that surface have to be? That surface would have to be a flat plane. So now this oval here is actually a flat plane facing the sun. That is the only way that you could have sunlight physically falling on a surface in a uniform way. That is the only way, is if it was flat. So that's what creates the flat Earth physics. All right, so I hope that's a little bit more clear using those diagrams. This is real, per second input. Roy says it's okay to take the per second input and spread it over the entire surface area of the Earth at once, even though that's a physical impossibility and it means nothing about reality. And it is equivalent to flat Earth. So let's look at my last slide here. So here is the climate science greenhouse effect derivation. Here's the way that climate science and climate physics teaches the astrophysics of sunlight falling on the Earth. Who's got better astrophysics? They're not teaching very good astrophysics, aren't they? Because of climate alarm, because of climate science having hijacked real physics and real astrophysics. This up here, that's not real astrophysics, guys. This here, that's real astrophysics. I'm sorry to tell you, but it's coming from an astrophysicist, okay? Really, sunlight only falls on one side of the Earth at once, especially when you're using the per second value and spreading while spreading sunshine over the entire surface area of the Earth at once is a physical impossibility in science. So in reality, in existence, in any consideration whatsoever. So what would you like? So here we have, this is the basis of climate physics. The result of this is that the sun cannot create the climate because the solar power, the sunlight, has been diluted into surface area and into time, which it does not exist and never exists. So that makes sunlight only minus 18 degrees Celsius, unable to create the climate. By consequence, they invent this part right here, which is their greenhouse effect. This is their fake version of the greenhouse effect. And they need it because this is now the climate creating itself. Since the sun can't create the climate, now the greenhouse effect creates the climate ex nihilo with no additional energy or anything. It's just the climate creating itself out of nothing. This is a fake version of the greenhouse effect that doesn't exist. It's mathematically, physically, theoretically, and graphically equivalent to flat Earth. That's why it is even drawn. When you do this, sure, you're spreading the sunlight over the entire sphere at once. And what happens when you do that? It becomes equivalent to flat Earth theory, and that is why you can draw it then as a flat line. That is why it is then drawn as a flat line, because that is what it is equivalent to. It's equivalent to flat Earth, and it is flat Earth. And because you've made these mistakes, then you extrapolate non-existent things that have nothing to do with reality because you're starting with a non-existent thing that has nothing to do with reality. And of course, as we've discussed in a previous video, the output of the Earth is being reversed for the input. I mean, of course, everything that gets generated from doing this initial step of spreading the sunlight over the entire surface area of the Earth at once, which is a physical impossibility, everything that follows is an error. Everything that follows is going to present a different paradox. And the reason why reality works this way is because it's trying to show you red light, red light, red light, you've made a mistake, work your way back, go back, work your way back to the beginning, work your way back as far as you need to find the mistake. Well, the mistake is at the very beginning. The mistake is at the very beginning in this division by 4, dividing sunlight over the entire surface area of the Earth at once, and this greenhouse effect, this fake greenhouse effect of climate alarm, which is actually refuted by real greenhouses. Real greenhouses could function this way, and if they did, they would demonstrate temperatures which indicated that this was in process and happening, but they don't, because of course, this process does not exist and is not occurring. So real greenhouses empirically refute this supposed this fake greenhouse effect of climate alarm, which is invented for basically their initial condition of equivalence to flat earth theory. Okay, so it's either that, or why not go with this? Here, you have the per second input falling over the Earth as it actually does, and here I've re-represented that in a conceptual schematic here to help us think about it. So what happens here? In this case, the sun creates the climate. And then, what is the climate? The climate is all consequential processes, is a transfer of solar heat. That is what the climate is. The climate is a consequence of a transfer of solar heat. Climate is the process of heat, solar heat, transferring. That is what the climate is, right? The climate is not the climate creating itself, which makes no sense and violates conservation of energy and basic logic and everything, and has this fake process. You can either have that, or you can have that the climate is the transfer of solar heat. The climate is the process and the consequences of the transfer of solar heat through the Earth, right? Obviously, the sun is creating the climate. So input transfers through to output. This is physically and theoretically realistic. You can look at this and say, well, that's reasonable. You can look at this and say, well, that's a flat line, right? Interestingly, this is not taught in modern physics as how the Earth climate system works in consequence to solar heating. This is taught in modern physics. This is part of the modern scientific paradigm. This is the result of scientific modern academic peer review in the core hard sciences. This is not allowed. I've tried to publish it and they won't. What does that indicate? We have a fundamental, gigantic error or flaw occurring somewhere in the scientific method, and it is a big deal, and it is going to need correction. I'll do another video on that in the future to discuss what is going to happen and what is going to need to happen and whether or not we have any solutions. Okay, so anyway, I hope that was helpful. And yeah, that's it. So take care, everybody. Nice talking to you again. Bye-bye.